Hi everyone. We are here today interviewing Beth. So we've got Amy, Caitlin, and Georgia, and we're sitting down with Beth to talk through her birth story. So Beth, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yes, my name's Beth. I have one son who's just about to turn 2. I am a photographer and what else is there about me? I am a single mom by choice. My family, my nuclear family is myself and my son, Rory. My extended family is I live on a property in the Hawkesbury with my parents and my brother. Very much multi-generational living, which is great. We absolutely love it. But yeah, that's kind of my little family as it is.
So we often like to hear about what people's ideas and beliefs about birth and pregnancy and, becoming a mother were before they fell pregnant. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, since I was young, I just loved the idea of pregnancy. Birth fascinated me. I remember when we were in I think it was year 8, and our science teacher showed us a birth video. And I remember just being so obsessed. And I sat at the front of the class and I just did not stop watching. I just thought it was the most amazing thing. And everybody else in the class were all like, it was horrible, and just being all dramatic. And I was just locked in and I was like, this is fascinating. Um,
Mm.
and I think that started my obsession with birth. Then, not long after that, so I was 16, one of the midwives at our local hospital got me in for a kind of work placement. I was there for a week and I just shadowed the midwives. I saw a couple of vaginal births. I was let in for a cesarean, which just now, with like how much I fight to get into cesareans as a photographer, that baffles me that they let a 16-year-old just stand there. It was just something that blew my mind. I thought it was the most amazing thing ever. And yeah, I wanted to be a midwife from that point. When I graduated school, I was convinced that I had to do nursing to do midwifery. So I had to do the double bachelor. I really struggled with nursing. I was working in a nursing home as well. And I just was like, this is not what I want to do. And so I left nursing and then moved over to the UK, came back 4 years later and started working for my parents who are photographers. Got invited to come and photograph a family friend's birth. So that kind of restarted the obsession with birth. And at that point, I wasn't really ready to have kids myself. I'd never been in any long term relationships or anything. I just never really found someone that felt right. And so it was always something that was just on the back burner. And then as I kind of, the more births that I was doing and a lot of home births especially, I was very much just like, this is amazing. And I started kind of being like, I really, I want to I want to be pregnant. I want to give birth. I wanted to have the home birth. Like I'd witnessed so many amazing home births and I was just like, that is what I want to do. Ideas on pregnancy, a lot of my friends had had kids. No one really had like major issues in pregnancy that I remember. My mum always spoke about her pregnancy as like she loved being pregnant. So it was always something that I had like a very positive view around. Birth wise, I'd had a couple of friends that had had pretty traumatic births, but I had witnessed enough really positive ones that I was like, well, I will do things differently. So that never concerned me. My mum did have a shoulder dystocia with my brother. And so obviously going into my birth, there was definitely a part of me that was on the back of my mind. But yeah, I think I had a very positive view of birth and pregnancy and yeah, how that all came about. I was looking forward to it.
Certainly a lot more comprehensive exposure than a lot of people have.
I just wanted to ask, because obviously you had this dream or this aspiration as a teenager to become a midwife, and obviously that kind of got a bit derailed with the whole nursing thing. And so when you were starting to attend home births, I'm wondering how that kind of integrated into the original desire to be a midwife.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because my original exposure to birth was in the hospital setting. all of my friends had had hospital births. I didn't know anyone who had home birthed. The first birth that I attended was a home birth, and she kind of fairly last minute changed to doing a home birth because it was at the start of COVID. She actually went to 42 plus 4, and I was so nervous. Like, I was just kind of like Googling, is it safe to go past 42 weeks? I was kind of like, what am I going to be photographing? Like, this is, who knows what's going to happen. I wasn't as involved as I am now with my clients with knowing about where they're at with their births and stuff, because it was kind of like the first time I'd ever done it. She was kind of like, yeah, I'll call you when to come. And I was like, okay, that's cool. That birth was actually like, it was fast. I think it was like 2.5 hours or something from like first contraction to baby. So it was very quick. I literally walked into the midwives and the doula, like just pots of water, just like piling it into the pool as fast as they could. It was like chaos. And the mum's there just on the couch, and she's like, I need to get in the pool. And they're like just trying to get it full. And then the baby was born. Everyone was snuggled up on the couch. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And then because it was COVID, I couldn't attend hospital births. So my original exposure when I got into this line of work was like just very wholesome home births. And it just very quickly shifted how I viewed birth.
Lovely. Well, thank you. That definitely answers my question. I just thought that was interesting because I feel like I've never heard you sort of speak about that particularly.
Yeah, cool. So do you want to tell us about how Rory came to be conceived?
So I definitely got to a point where I just was like, you know what, I think this is something I want to do. I'd started looking into kind of like having a baby on my own and what that looks like. I actually cannot for the life of me remember where the idea came from. I don't know anyone that was a single mother by choice, but I somehow ended up down this road, and I was in like the Facebook groups and just doing whatever research I could. I remember speaking to my mum about it for the first time, and I was kind of like, I'm at a crossroads because I feel like I am at a point with, which I feel like a lot of women must go through this, where it's like my work is really picking up, and either I go hard on the professional side or I stop and have a baby. And mum said to me, you're never going to regret having a baby. So I decided, I'm a planner in that I like organizing my life. And so I had decided that I wanted to go to California to go to Disneyland for my 30th birthday. And then I said, okay, well, I can't be pregnant for that because then I can't go on the roller coasters. So I'll then fall pregnant when I get back. I'd actually decided I wanted to have a July baby because I was like, I want to share my birthday month. And then was like, then we can like go on holidays together to celebrate our birthday month. And so that was like my original plan. And then I thought, well, I've never tried to fall pregnant before, so let's give myself a buffer month. I'd found a donor. I didn't want to waste the money on going through a clinic when I knew I wanted a home birth. I wanted the private midwife. I wanted the doula. I wanted the photographer. I knew that was going to cost about 10 grand. And so I was like, well, I'm not spending, more than that on falling pregnant if I could fall pregnant outside of a clinic. I'd already knew I kind of wanted to go down like the at-home artificial insemination. I'd heard the horror stories. There's a lot of situations you see where people will pay all this money and then the donor list is opened up to them and there's like 2 people. And then if those 2 people don't vibe with you, like you don't vibe with their profiles, you're stuck and you paid all this money and you just have to wait until a new one comes up. They are technically capped at how many families they can donate to try and limit the amount of siblings, but there's ways around it. I wanted the more personal option. I also wanted the option for if Rory at one point when he got older wanted to reach out, ask questions, then he had the option to do that. I also had a genetic disease that popped up in my family that we didn't find out about until my dad was in his 40s, I think it was. And that's another thing that I was like, if something was to pop up in the donor's family, I would want to be told about it. Whereas through the clinic, if something medical comes up after they've made their donation, there's no obligation for them to tell the clinic or the clinic to tell the families. And yeah, there was definitely a lot of things because it's like the most awkward dating. Like, I met up with the donor that I ended up using for coffee because it's kind of like, okay, tell me like the worst things about your family. Like, you know, what are the diseases? What are the like, you know, yeah. So it was really awkward, but you just kind of had to be like very much to the point. This is what my expectations are. This is what I'm looking for. Does that match? I did kind of go back and forth. I remember talking to Amy a bit about it of like, there was a couple of things that came up that I was questioning if I should be concerned about. So I met with two donors and I was tossing between the two. And in the end, I think the universe really stepped in with one of those donors and was like, nope, this is not the right person. And I then had like a panic of, well, I'm coming up to my like period when I decided I was going to have my test run. So, and then my like control freak in that was like, no, well, I need to do it now. I'm doing it. Like, I've decided it's happening this month, so it's happening this month. And so, yeah, it was funny because my mum even was like, I just don't think this is the right month to like, you know, be starting this. And I just was kind of like, oh, I'm not listening to you anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I did it anyway. Conception wise, I've been working with an acupuncturist for a month. I was like, if I'm doing this, I'm going to throw as much as I can at it. And I had a friend who'd used an acupuncturist and fell pregnant after having a loss. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, I think I did 2 donations like the day after each other. That was all that was needed. I went into that classic 2-week weight spiral. That's when kind of like a lot of anxiety started coming up because I think it was like very real all of a sudden. I was like, oh gosh, what have I done? And I remember Amy, I'd be like, oh, I'm getting really bad headaches. And I'm like, and she's like, yeah, you're pregnant. And I'm like, no. Like, it's not happening this month. It's next month. This is the trial month. But yeah, so then I was pregnant. I think I got my positive. I was testing from like day 8. And then I got my first positive on, I think it was day 10. And I'd kind of taken it and then came back and it was the faintest line. And I just was like, went into shock. I messaged Amy, I messaged my acupuncturist, and she was kind of like, oh, I don't know, sure. And then I went along to, there was like locally a midwife that I know and have worked with. She was having like an open day at her practice. And I went along and was just kind of like in a bit of like shock. And I told a friend that I saw there, and she was like all super excited. And then actually the midwife I hired was also there, and I told her. So I told quite a few people straight away and more just in a like, what the hell just happened? Like, I can't believe this is real. I obviously I told my midwife that I ended up hiring then. Amy knew. I think she was the first one I messaged. But yeah, and then kind of that's the start of the fun pregnancy.
Mm-hmm. You said you obviously already had a relationship with Amy and you always knew that you wanted to hire Amy as your doula?
Yes. Yeah. I think we talked about it for ages. There was a lot of conversations with Amy about like, I think she was my go-to when I was like, I'm thinking of doing this. What are your thoughts? And then, yeah, I always knew that I wanted her to be my doula. I'd worked with Amy quite a lot as well over the 3 years I'd been doing birth work. We'd done a lot of births together. So yeah, I always just knew that was where I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
I had also already spoken to who I used as my midwife. We'd also done a couple of births together, and I'd reached out to her before and kind of said, this is what I'm wanting to do. And she didn't know that I didn't have a partner. So I remember when I said to her, like, hey, I'm just letting you know I'm going to start trying to conceive. Are you available winter next year kind of thing? And she was like, yep, I'm not going on holidays. And she's like, just have fun, you know, trying to fall pregnant. And I was like, oh, it's not going to be that much fun, but thank you. I was kind of like, yeah, like no partner. So, which it was interesting. Like, we just never had that conversation before. So it was kind of then just got all my ducks in a row of, you know, that early excitement around like, oh my gosh, this is happening and what we're going to do. I then very early on had a situation with my acupuncturist, and she is a fertility acupuncturist. So she works with a lot of people that do IVF and struggle to fall pregnant. So I think because of that, she has a very cynical view on that, like, yeah, it's not easy to fall pregnant. So I kind of remember one of the early appointments I had with her, and she said, well, if this pregnancy sticks, as if it wasn't a guarantee that I would stay pregnant. And I just remember, like, from that moment, I then was like, oh, like, there's an option for it not to work. So that was like literally days after ovulation. And that is really disappointing because it then just like spiked my anxiety. I then started getting really stressed that I wasn't going to stay pregnant. I had the tiniest amount of bleed, like, and you couldn't even, like, I think I wiped and there was like a little bit of blood. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the end. Had a freak out. That was, I think, around 7 weeks. And I think the next day or something, I was meant to be having a dating scan, and they kind of got me in early just to help with my anxiety. I think my doctor even was, my GP was a bit kind of like, oh yeah, like, you know, first pregnancies. No one really helped with my anxiety. I think Amy definitely did. I was dumping a lot on her, I believe. But yeah, so there was definitely a lot of like unfortunate things that were said early on. I actually even got in and saw someone who I'd done a few births with. She is a counselor and a midwife, and I did an early appointment with her of just kind of like, why am I so anxious? Like, what is going on? I was so excited to be pregnant. I was so looking forward to be pregnant. And now I'm just like riddled with anxiety. Anxiety is not new to me, but this was a very different type of anxiety. And I did not like it. And I felt like it was taking away from my joy. Like, there was no excitement, there was no joy, there was just stress. And I didn't like that. But yeah, I think it's funny looking back now because I was like just questioning a lot of like, am I actually pregnant? Is this real? What's going on? How will I know if I'm pregnant? Then I got sick and then I knew I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
I was like so sick. I think that started around 8 weeks, maybe. I'm trying to remember. But then I was sick the whole time through. I think there was like 2 weeks in the middle that I wasn't sick. And I was like, oh, it's the end. I think it was around like 20, somewhere in the 20-week range that I had my little 2-week break. And then it was, when it came back again, was when my midwife actually gave me some medication for it. She had given me something early on, the like rest of it, and bees, one of the bees.
B6.
Bees.
Yeah.
And it made me really drowsy. And I was still on call for birth. So I was like, I can't take this because I need to drive in the middle of the night to birth. So that was really unfortunate. I wasn't really given a lot of other options. And then I was given the ondansetron when it kind of kicked back in. But then that also just caused all sorts of other problems. I just like did not really go well with that. Like, it took away the sickness. Like, I wasn't vomiting, but yeah, I really struggled with that as well. So then I had to kind of like, I just feel like I just kind of I just complained about it nonstop. Anyone I spoke to, I was like, this is horrible. So my idea of pregnancy was really shifted in that, like, I did not enjoy it. I was exhausted. I was working full time. I was attending births. I felt like a shell of a human being, which is sad because it was something I was really excited for. So I was like, people will be like, you'll have the bad pregnancy, but you'll have a good birth, and you'll have a good postpartum. Like, I think that's like, you get one of the three is bad.
Aside from the sickness, you obviously had a bit of anxiety. Did you find that the anxiety got better or got worse across the pregnancy?
It got better. It did, because then I was sick, and that just kind of like took all my energy. I wasn't questioning if I was still pregnant because I was sick. I had an anterior placenta. So I actually did not feel him move until I was 19 weeks, I think, was the first time I felt him move. And they were only like the tiniest little like flutters. But yeah, so there was definitely then a little bit of anxiety of like, oh, I struggled to have that like bonding that I feel like people talked about, because I was like, I have no concept of like who is in there. I also had in my mind that I would have a girl, and I think it's in my family, it's always girl, boy. Like, that is just how my mum's side, have babies. And so I was like, well, that is what will happen, and was also only planning on having one. So I was like, well, it's just going to be a girl. And I think every time I had envisioned what my life would look like, it was with a girl. So then when I was 16 weeks, I found out he was a boy. I had done the bicarb pee test, like, you know, where it's like you add the bicarb soda to your urine, and it had fizzled up, which is meant to be a boy. And I was like, no, like, no way. I was like, and then I'm Googling it, and it was like 50-50 chance of being right. So I was like, oh, well, it's not right. But going into finding out, there was an element where I knew it was a boy. I definitely had my little mourning period of being, I was disappointed because I just couldn't fathom having a boy. And I remember the day before I found out, we had a home birth meet, and I remember having this big conversation because it was something that was really stressing me, because I was like, I don't know how to raise boys. I don't like, a girl feels easy. And I also was like, this world is like really harsh, and I don't know, how do I make sure that I'm raising a good man? I remember some very wise words were shared with me that day, especially with one mum that comes along and she has 3 boys. But I still was very much in the like, well, no, I don't want it. I don't want that. And then, yeah, I found out he was a boy, and I was a bit like, oh gosh, what do I do? But now I am just like, obviously I love him so much, but I am also like, it wasn't as bad or scary as I thought it was. And I just wish I could like go back to that version of me and be like, it's going to be okay. Like, I do remember there was a lot of disappointment. And I remember also I was reading around that time, Birth with Confidence, and the whole red thread between the women. And I was like, I remember driving in the car listening to it and just like sobbing. And I was just like, I don't have that. And I just was really upset about that. And obviously there's still a bit of like grief around that now, but like I am so, I'm so happy with him and who he is. But yeah, there was definitely a period that I had to really just like work through that. And something I didn't want to have to work through. I was annoyed that I had to work through it. I was like, no, like, couldn't this be easy? Nothing else has been easy. Like, but yeah.
Can I ask, Beth, you said you touched on there about only like knowing or believing or thinking that you only wanted one child.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how you came to that decision. Is this something you'd always envisioned, that it would only be the one child?
Yeah, it's interesting because like when I was younger, I wanted 3 because there was only me and my brother, and I was like, that's not enough. I always wanted another sibling because like I think I was like, well, I think I wanted a sister, and that's where that came from. When I started planning going down the single motherhood route, I was like, well, one is practical. So that's kind of where it came from, where I was like, I can handle one. One is not too much. Yeah. And so that, I think that's where I settled on the one. Then when I was pregnant as well, I was like, I'm not doing this again. Like, there's no way I am going through pregnancy again. When I went overseas and I lived in the UK, I just loved traveling, seeing new places. And I always was like, I want to have a child experience travel. I remember thinking like I wanted, by the time they finished school, I wanted to have gone to every continent. That was like a goal that I had just decided. And it's something I still have in my mind, as like I would still like to do that. We'll see how he travels. But yeah, it's definitely, that was kind of like, there was a lot of practicality around that decision.
And so how were you preparing for your birth then, and your postpartum, if you were preparing for that as well?
I'm gonna look at Amy for this one because she's gonna be like, oh. I stuck my head in the sand big time.
Good.
I was like, before I fell pregnant, I was like, I know so much. I've seen so much. I know everything. And then I was pregnant. I was like, oh, this is hard. And then when it came to the birth, I just was like, I don't want to think about it. I had a vision in my head of what it would look like. I had my photos that I wanted captured. Like, that was ridiculous. Like I had very ridiculous views of what my birth would look like. And I very much, like Amy a couple of times was like, I think you should come to a calm birth class. And I was like, no. And like we'll do like an online. I was like, no, it's fine. I don't have time. I'm too busy. My last birth I photographed I was 35 weeks when she had that baby. So I was also like, I don't want to plan my birth until I'm done attending births. That was like the hardest birth I've ever had to attend in terms of like I physically was not capable of being there. It was over an hour drive. I think I had heat packs all over my hips. I took my dad's car because it had heated seats as well because I was like, I'm in so much pain. I think they rang me at like 11 o'clock to come, and it took me so long to roll over in bed that like the phone rang out. Like that's how like just stiff and sore, and I just had a lot of pelvic pain, and yeah, I was very uncomfortable. I also put a lot of pressure on this poor mum that like if she goes well, I'll go well. So she was also having a home birth. Her name was also Bethany. It was her first birth. In my mind, I was like, depending on how this birth goes is how I will prepare for my own birth. Interestingly enough, we did have a very similar like start to labor and birth, and she did amazing. And I walked away being like, okay, I can do that now. It was one of those things. I actually was speaking to someone about this the other day about how all through my pregnancy, every time one of my clients gave birth, they then would have the baby and turn to me and go, "You're next." And I was like, like, I remember one mum who I have done another birth with her and love her dearly, but she pushed for 5 hours. And I remember her turning to me like, "Oh, you're next." And I was like, no, it's like, I can't. Like she did so amazing. Like it was, but I was just like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. So I was, even though I finished birth, I was still doing a lot of newborns, which I loved. I loved doing newborns while I was pregnant. I loved having like somewhere to rest the newborns when I was like sitting, just like resting my belly. And I loved that, like at that point as well, when I was far enough along, Rory was like kicking back. And I kind of loved that. I just thought it was the cutest thing ever. I do remember photographing some twins when I was 38 weeks. And I just had a scan to check something out with Rory. Whatever size he was the exact size that this baby I was holding was born at. And I remember holding him up against my belly and being like, what the hell? Like, how am I going to like birth one of these? And I think it's like a really unique situation to be in, that you're like actually holding babies, very fresh babies, like that close to giving birth. Really makes you like overthink it. And then I think at like 38 weeks, my midwife was like, please just put the car seat in the car. Like it's getting too close. You're stressing me out. And yeah, so there was an element of me being like, I'm done. I'm physically done. I remember at 37 weeks, my brother was like, how long now? Like, when will he be born? Because my whole family was so sick of me being pregnant as well. Like, I just complained nonstop. I was miserable. And I was like, I don't know. It could be 2 weeks. It could be 5 weeks. Like, I have no idea. And he was like, oh gosh, like that's horrible. I was like, yeah, yes, it is.
You mentioned that you had been having some pelvic pain and stuff too. So do you want to talk a bit about like that and what were you doing anything to help that, or
Yeah. So one of my good friends is a women's health physio. So I was seeing her regularly. Like my office was across the road from her office. And so I would like message her and be like, are you at work? And she'll be like, yeah, come over on my lunch break. And I would go over and she would do whatever she did that made me scream at her and just like tell her she was the worst person in the world. And then we would have a cry and have a chat, and then I would leave. She was like my little like extra therapist. I unloaded a lot on her. I'm thankful for her. A lot of stuff about me being upset about it being a boy. Like she was from the start, she's like, it's a boy, And I was like, no, like it's not. She's like, I'm telling you it's a boy. But she was really good in that aspect. That was all I was doing. And in hindsight, I should have been seeing a chiropractor. I don't know if it was recommended. There were a couple of times where I would message my midwife and I'm be like, I'm having this, like I'm, all these pains. And she'd be like, yeah, that's just pregnancy. And I was just a bit kind of like, okay, so I just have to suck it up.
Mm.
Yeah, I would do things very differently this time around. I was working with Brooke really for like the physio aspect, but we figured out after I had Rory that really I needed to be seeing a chiropractor because we were just putting a band-aid over the actual underlying issues, which were like I had broken my tailbone when I was like 16. But yeah, my whole body was out of alignment. My pelvis was tilted in and I had tension from my pelvis up to my neck.
Yeah. So, okay, so how were you feeling then when you finally finished up work? Were you kind of forced a little bit to face what was ahead of you then, or did you just find other things to distract yourself and stick your head back in the sand?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really do any birth prep. Like, well, I did a little bit of like, I blew the pool up. Like,
I don't think that's what people mean when they say prepare for birth, but
well, even I think like when we did my mother blessing, I was like so adamant of like, not because I think as well that was like that's like, it's getting close. So I was at least 38 weeks. And I remember because we went out to dinner and I remember I couldn't sit down. I was in so much pain and I was like standing up and just like pacing. And I think I had like my foot up on the like chair at one point because I was like, I just am so uncomfortable. So no, I didn't actually really do that much. I listened to a lot of podcasts and I did listen to that Birth with Confidence. Yeah, I really struggled with the reality of it. And there was a lot of like concerns. I think deep in my mind, there was a lot of points of like, I'm worried about things going wrong. I really was worried about going to hospital. I did a birth plan with Amy, and there was a couple of times where she's like, "What about this?" And I said, "Well, I'm it's not happening." So, like,
don't worry about that one.
Like, and I think, yeah, there were some deep-rooted fears that I just also didn't want to bring up. I didn't want to unleash those.
Do you
So
think
yes,
those fears were like born of things you've seen and witnessed, or like just
yes, yeah.
strange like ideas?
I think there was things that I had witnessed. And so there was like an element of, I don't want to start thinking about this because it just opens a can of worms. I think like, yeah, I just was kind of very much stuck my head in the sand right to the end.
Do you think there was an element of, if I've got the home birth, I've got the midwife, I've got the doula, I've got all this planned, so
He'll
I'll
be
be
right.
like,
Yeah. And I think I have voiced this since, where I said, I did everything right.
Yeah.
And I think it was that, like, yeah, I did know a lot and like I'd done a lot of research. It's not like I was going in blind. I didn't
No,
know.
well, I don't think anyone ends up planning a home birth with a doula with support who
Absolutely.
doesn't know anything. Like it doesn't just kind of happen because you don't know what you're doing.
Yes. But I do think there was an element of me being like, I have a birth team that I've created of people that are going to help me make sure that this is
And in your defense, those usually are the biggest protective factors in your birth experience. So
yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it was interesting. It was a really interesting headspace to be in, especially at the end, because there was an element of like, I'm so ready for this to be done. I'm just so ready to give birth. But then the other side of it was just like, I'm not ready to plan this and process this and go through all of this. I don't know if doing a birth class would have changed birth anyway. There was an element of not wanting to go to a birth class, for instance, because I didn't want to be there on my own. Someone asked me this recently, actually, where they were like, do you feel like you've missed out because you don't have a partner kind of thing? I really craved touch when I was pregnant. There was like one point where I was like, oh, you could totally see the benefit of having a partner in someone to be like, yeah, so like I'm carrying our child. So like, give me a massage.
You need to touch me.
Yeah,
like,
do your part.
Just think like that. And I love my mom dearly, but she struggles with touch. And so I just would like get to a point where I would just be like an absolute mess. And I would just be like, I need you to scratch my back. But yeah, that was definitely one point where I was like, oh, I could definitely see the benefit of having like a partner in your life then. Another was just the not having someone who is like right in the thick of it with you. So like obviously my parents were very much in the thick of it, but also at the same time, like it's not someone that I could kind of be like talk about everything with. So I was very lucky to have you girls because there was a lot of voice notes of just, and I remember even like the first time I started leaking colostrum. I don't think it was even leaking. I squeezed it out, but and I remember like saying, I was like, oh my gosh, like there's colostrum there. And I was kind of having a bit of a freak out about it. And all three of you came back with voice notes and like, this is the most exciting thing ever. Like you're at the start of this journey and like how amazing and how beautiful. And there's me having a panic attack because I'm like, that means I'm closer to giving birth. Like, I was just like, I was very lucky to have you guys as my village, but I did very much go, you can understand we're having someone right there laying in bed with you and you can just unleash everything in your head to them. I also know that not everyone, even who has a partner, has that, but they were kind of really the only points of it. Like, would have been nice to have someone going through the thick of the newborn nights, but then also I survived, so it was kind of like, and yeah, I think the pros definitely outweighed the cons.
Yeah.
So birth wise, I had convinced myself I was going past 41 weeks. I had decided the 17th sounded nice. I was born on the 17th. My brother was born on the 17th. So I was like, that will fit in lovely. As I was getting obviously closer to my due date, I was like, that's really far away. And I don't like that anymore. My mum went over with both me and my brother. I was over 41 weeks. I think he was as well. So then I was kind of like, yeah, well, I'm going to do the same. I think around like just after 39 weeks, there was one night where I had some Braxton Hicks. It wasn't anything major, not really pain, but I could feel my stomach tightening and then going away. And I remember messaging Amy and I was like, what the hell? But yeah, I was definitely very done. We all had lunch on the Thursday, which wasn't an official home birth meet, but we had created this joke because one of our friends had gone into labor after a home birth meet. And we joked that the oxytocin was so good that it would put you into labor. And so then I was like, well, let's go have lunch on the Thursday and we'll just create our own like little oxytocin meet. And I was really uncomfortable that day. I remember being like really, really uncomfortable. And then I went home and I remember it was raining and I joked, imagine going into labor in a flood. Anyway, that night I woke up and I went to the toilet and was like, oh, okay. I was like, I've weird myself a bit. That's weird. Changed my undies and then went back into bed. And then I was like, why am I still wet? Like, what is going on? I messaged Amy and told her that my voice was working. And I think it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, which, yeah. And then I was excited. I think I was like, oh, it's happening. And I was like, due date, baby, like how much fun? Because it was my due date. I was like, oh, the home birth meet got things going. And then now I'm going to have a due date, baby. And how amazing, like how much fun is that? I messaged my midwife that morning. I didn't think I had like some crampings and stuff overnight, but I didn't really have any contractions, nothing major. And I did fall back to sleep a couple of hours later. I think I like was up and I was buzzing and then I just fell asleep. The next day I woke up and there was no contractions. My midwife was kind of questioning if it was my waters because obviously it was leaking. It wasn't like a gush or anything. And that's where a little bit of the anxiety started coming back in. But I very much just went like inward. It was raining all that day. And I actually just did not leave my room. I also did not tell anyone but Amy and my midwife that my waters had broken. So I didn't really want anyone to know because I didn't want anyone to start stressing or not stressing, but start getting excited even. I think there was an element of like, people start like getting excited and being like, oh my gosh, the baby's coming. I was like, no, I just don't talk to me. Don't look at me. Don't let me just be me. So I actually just spent most of that day in bed. I think I was just watching movies or something, and mum had written me this whole list of things I had to do that day of like jobs around the house and stuff. And I think I messaged her and I said, oh, I'm just really not feeling up to it. She was at work, and so there's 2 bridges to get across from where she works, like to where we live. One of them had closed, which isn't the one she goes across, but because that had closed because of a flood, me joking about imagine being in labor in a flood, everybody in the Hawkesbury was using the other bridge to get across the river. And so it took her 3 hours to get home on a trip that usually takes 16 minutes. So luckily I hadn't told her, because that would have just like made her like freak out. I told her when she got home, and she was like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe you didn't tell me. And I was like, well, this is why I didn't tell you, because she's like, if I'd known, I would have like run home. And I was like, well, that's why I didn't tell you. So it's a good thing I didn't. And I kind of was like, it's probably going to kick off tonight. So just, I'll let you know if I need you, kind of thing. Went to bed, was woken up at around 10 to some light contractions, really just period pains kind of thing. But I remember just looking at my phone a couple of times, and they were 10 minutes apart. I do remember I had to get up out of bed at one point, and I had to I wasn't able to be laying down between them. And I think I had a heat pack on my back because my back was killing me. And then they started slowing down again. And I remember messaging Amy at one point, and I was like, it's slowing down. What's going on? And she's like, just go to sleep. Like, if that's what's happening, just go to sleep. So then Saturday morning, woke up, nothing, like completely gone away. I was surprisingly calm and was just kind of like, it is going to happen when it happens. I was very confident that like it is going to happen. It was a really weird space to be in, because as someone who overthinks everything and stresses about everything, I actually feel like I was uncharacteristically calm then. And I think it was just my brain was just like, just don't overthink this. Like, it's not worth it. And I was very much like, I'm nearly there. Like, I'm nearly at the end. So like, there's no point freaking out or anything. My midwife was getting quite stressed at this point because we'd obviously gone over the 24-hour mark of waters breaking. She came to visit me, and she had just like discussed the risks of going past 24 hours with waters breaking. So we'd agreed that I will take my temperature every 4 hours. I knew the signs of like meconium staining, just any signs of an infection to keep an eye out for. She had mentioned that she'd called another midwife that I knew and had kind of like expressed some stress to her, which in hindsight, I'm like, I don't think this conversation should have been had with me. But the other midwife had said, she's fine, just leave her. She'll go into labor. Like, don't overthink this. And yeah, so she kind of then recommended I do some curb walking, and also was kind of like, I said that like, oh, I feel like there's some positional things going on. And she said, we'll get Amy in to help. So I'd organised Amy to come that night to help do some spinning baby stuff with me, which actually on the prep, we had gone through all the spinning baby stuff, and I had been doing that before labour just to try and ease up on the pelvic pain and all of that. But yeah, so went and did some curb walking, which was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And I don't think I will ever recommend that anyone should curb walk, because it was just ridiculous. I had really bad, like my magnesium and stuff had been really low. And I was also really struggling to consume enough liquid. So I was definitely dehydrated as well throughout my whole pregnancy, like not just in labor. And so then my muscles just were like, what the hell are you doing? This is horrible. I ended up having just the most painful calves afterwards, and just being like, why have I done that? Because chances are I'm going to have a baby tonight. And I've now gone and done this, and now I'm in pain and like struggling to walk. So I was really annoyed about that. I also sent my mum that day on the wild goose chase to get me sparkling water that has the lime in it. And she did find me some, and I was like guzzling it like there was no tomorrow. I also had been in touch with a local chiropractor at that point, but she said she couldn't take me on because she hadn't seen me prior to being in labor. I was too scared to go see my acupuncturist because, again, I was scared that if I went across the bridge, I would get stuck and couldn't come back over. But I was quietly confident that I would just go into labor that night. I had re-listened to the Great Birth Rebellion episode on PROM, and I remember it's like 92% of women will go into labor by 72 hours. So that to me was my time. My midwife wanted to talk about induction, wanted to talk about going into hospital, and I said, I'm not discussing anything until we get 72 hours. So I think I was quietly confident. I was like, we're not even that far on. Saturday night, went to bed, again, woken up at about 10 contractions. They were definitely closer together this time. So I think they started about 5 minutes apart, got to about 4, some maybe 3, questionable. I don't think I was timing properly. But they were definitely a little bitey. I got in the shower a couple of times, but again, I was doing this all on my own. And so it was really annoying to like take the TENS machine off and put it back on. And so I just kind of like stuck to just the TENS machine. I think I was on the side of the bed a lot. I had a yoga ball, and I was just kind of like just getting through it. I was feeling good. I was kind of just like, well, this is it. This is the start. It's going to start happening.
He was obviously your support person, one of your support people, but you were also planning on having your mum present.
Yeah, so support team was Amy, was my doula. My mum was going to be there, and Brooke, my friend and physio, was going to be there, and then the 2 midwives and my photographer. So it was a big team. We joked a lot about it being a party birth. And yeah, it was, but I very much went inward in this early labor period. I think things started to slow down again around 3, 4 a.m. And then Amy suggested that mum, so like Amy was like helping me via message at this point, which shows how early it was that I was still messaging her. And she was like, maybe get your mum to do some of those spinning baby stuff again, see if we can kind of like shift things. And then mum came and was doing it, and I was like, it's not good enough. Like, I think I knew it was fizzling out again, and I was upset. And so I was like, no, like I don't want this. And so I called Amy to come and help. So I think you got there at about 6 a.m. or something, and then did a couple of spinning baby stuff with me, and then it just fizzled right out. I think it really spaced out. I was falling asleep on the ball. And I think Amy then said to me, I think you just need to go and rest. And I think I need to go. And I was like, that's fine. Like, it was all right. And I'd been in situations where we'd done this at birth, and I knew that people sitting there watching you didn't help. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. She went. I think I laid down for a little bit and I had a little bit of a nap. So we're on Sunday morning now. And I remember I had a panic because we'd recently moved and I didn't have any blinds or curtains in my bedroom. And I remember being like, the light is going to come up. And I had said to mum, I need something to cover the windows. Like, as soon as the sun comes up, it's going to disturb me. And she was stressing about trying to figure out what to get. And as she was doing that, I stormed out to the garage and just got these like moving boxes and then took them back to my room and shoved them all up on the windows. My midwife came around 10 a.m. to check in on me. And I was having 7-minute contractions then. And they were good. She kind of checked on Rory. He was fine. Checked on me. I had no temperature, nothing, no signs of anything amiss. And she was kind of like, you're doing well. Like, they were definitely a lot more bitey at that point. I was really like breathing through them at that stage, but it was still very early. So she was like, I've got someone else I just have to go and check on. I'm going to do that. Call me if you need me. She also suggested at that point I should contact Brooke. And she's like, why don't you get Brooke in and see if she can do anything, help get rid of the tension? Because I think she'd felt my hips at one point and she was saying that there was definitely some tension. I think she also said just lie down and try and get asleep. try and have a sleep. So I think I laid down, had one contraction. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I can't sleep. I just need this to be done. I was definitely at the like end of my tether at this point. So I called Brooke. She headed over. I think she got there. I have no idea. Probably an hour or so later. And that's when she used her magic hands. That's what I said. The magic hands that put me into active labor. She just knew where all my tension points were. She knew where I was holding my tension. She had some ideas on how to get rid of it. Don't know what she did. She was doing something like around my bum, and then they came in hard and fast. So I then just like very quickly bumped up to like 5-minute contractions. She would do something and I would instantly have a contraction. And so then she was like, let's do this. Like, let's get this going. I was like, cool. Okay. So then we were very much on this like mission of like, we're going to make this baby come. Like, we're going to do this. And so anytime she like wouldn't do whatever she was doing and the contraction would then take a bit longer to come in, I would get really huffy and really frustrated. And she was like, just got to let it happen. I was definitely complaining a lot. And it's funny because I think it was a couple of hours of just us, the two of us, just working through it. Mum at one point went to have a shower, came back out and was like, whoa, okay, something has shifted. I definitely shifted into active labor. I was a lot more vocal. I was doing a lot of I actually really enjoyed the horse lips, which, like I think I'd heard B from Core and Floor mention that it'd been a really great way to like relax the cervix. And I think she'd said like, you got to practice it because it's like not something you're like good at just doing. But I didn't practice it, but I just did it and I really enjoyed it. To me, the contractions were feeling really long. They were definitely over a minute and they were coming quite close together. It's all a bit of a blur at the same time. Mum had come back out because her job, there's a photo of her list that I'd given her on the fridge. And it's like, call Amy. And then it was like, Amy will call the midwives and the photographer and everything. Like, it was all the expectation that Amy was going to be there. I was just so in it and so not aware of time that I didn't really realize what was going on. I still was in denial that I was even in active labor. And so I think Amy had been trying to get in touch with me, been trying to get in touch with Brooke, finally got onto my mum. And Mum just sent her a video of her contraction. And Amy was like, I should be there. And so I remember like Mum was like, Amy thinks she should come. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. Amy can come. And then she said, Amy thinks everyone should come. And I remember saying no. I was really worried that if everyone arrived at the same time, that it would just fizzle out. I was very much in denial. And so I said, she can call them, but like I don't want them all coming in. And so I just kind of left that up to Mum and Amy. And then I remember Brooke kept putting me on the toilet. So we did like different spots. I really enjoyed being up against the chest of drawers that we have that's like a bit higher. And I was just leaning up against that. I really liked that. She kept putting me on the toilet and I hated it. But I think it definitely helped. And I remember at one point when I knew everyone was on their way, I was just wearing like a tank top kind of thing. I was like, oh, that means the photographer's coming. And I went and put a different bra on. And I think when I was in my bedroom, Brooke was in there with me at one point. And I said, do you think it's too early? Like, do you think I'm in active labor? And she's like, yes, you're definitely in active labor. And I was like, oh, okay. So then Amy got there first, and I still remember she came up and she gave me a little kiss on the side of my head, and I think I just started crying. And I think I remember saying to her, I'm like, this is hard. And she's like, I know, it's okay. You're doing it. Like, you're doing amazing. And I think I was just like, I had in my head that it would still be so long. So I'd had in my head that like, well, I'm not going to have this baby till sunrise. Like, everyone's like sunrise, sunset babies. I was like, I'm not going to have it till sunrise. I'm going to have to do this all night. And I can't feel if anything's changing. I knew it was cracking on nicely, but it was like, I can't tell if things are changing. And there's a video of me saying to Amy, should I be able to feel my cervix opening? I didn't say cervix. I think I said, should I feel it open? And she's like, what open? I was like, should I be feeling my cervix open? And she's like, no. And then because I had been kind of like during the contractions, like not pushing, but I was kind of like, if I kind of bear down a little bit, I was like, I can force this to open, right? Like, you know, the logic of like, if I push hard enough, then his head's going to be kind of coming down on the cervix and then it'll open. And I think there was like a conversation of like, don't push unless you actually need to push. And because I was kind of like, well, how do I know? Like, you'll know when you have to push. There also was like a very hilarious video that my mum took of me just exclaiming how much I hated giving birth and being in labor. And I think I said, like, if anybody, because everyone told me during pregnant, because I said, well, this is my one baby, like I'm not doing this again. And they were like, once you have the baby, you'll want to have another one. And I was like, anybody tells me that, I'm gonna punch him in the head. Like I was just like so angry at that point as well. I was like, why would anyone think that I would want to do this again? Like this is horrific. This was definitely my hardest part of labor was this like 4 or so hours of just like it getting really intense, which in hindsight, it was nothing. And then my midwife arrived and I remember I just screamed in her face when she walked in the door. I was just furious. I was thinking a lot during my contractions. And one of the things I was apparently thinking about was she had said to me, well, just remember your breaks are longer than your contractions. So like in the theory that you've got a minute contraction and a 3-minute break, you've got more rest than you have contractions. And I clung to that as a lifeline. I was like, how great. That's a lovely thing to tell someone. My TENS machine was telling me a different story, was that I was having 2 contractions with a minute break. It probably was very wildly wrong. And so I was fuming that my midwife had given me false hope that I would have more rest. And so, yeah, I just screamed in her face when she walked in the door and I said, you lied to me. And I was really angry. And she was kind of like, cool, we're in labor. Everyone did just arrive at, I think there was probably about 45 minutes between Amy getting there and the midwives and my photographer getting there. They did all come in. It didn't affect me at all. I really wanted to get into the pool at this stage because I knew, again, like I was feeling like I wasn't getting a rest. And I had witnessed so many women in labor that when they immerse themselves in the water, they get that like rest and it spaces out a little bit. So I was like, once I get in the water, I can space it out and I can just have a little bit, just let me get my breath back, let me catch up, and then I'll be able to do it. We had run out of hot water ages ago. So we had no hot water. They also started filling the pool up and nobody was like at the pool and the water pressure was quite intense. And so the hose flipped out. And so whatever hot water we had ended up just on the ladder.
Oh, no.
And so there was this whole panic of trying to mop that up kind of thing. And it was like this whole big panic of me kind of like really just saying I want to get in the water and everyone trying to panic on how to do that. Pots were being filled up at the stove. It was just trying to do everything in the attempt of also trying to fix. I think they were trying to get some kettles going. And so the power was tripping. And so just like, it was just a bit of a chaotic moment. I don't remember too much of it. I do remember a couple of times of like coming aware and just people running and just like, oh my gosh. And then I would just go back inward and just close my eyes again and just be like, what is like, I just
can't deal with that.
I was like, this is your job. Deal with it. Just get me in the pool. I don't care. I remember at one point I was going to the bathroom and I walked past the pool and I looked in and there was like 20 centimeters of water. And I was like, what the hell? Like, that's not what I was hoping to see. And I was fuming. But then eventually the pool got filled enough and I got in. And I do think I had a little bit of a break when I got in. It is all a bit of a blur, but getting in the water definitely gave me, I went into a different headspace when I got into the water. I think I kind of was like, I'm close. I just knew that I was close and that there wasn't that much more to go. The downside was I had like a really big pool. So because we only got the water to a certain level, I was having a lot of back pain during the labor, which he was posterior. So that's why. And it explains the whole stop start labor and everything. But to get my back down in the water enough, I wanted to be on hands and knees, but I wasn't able to really get in a good position there. And I also wanted people giving me some hip support and counter pressure. And they couldn't reach me. The pool was just too big. And so that became really hard because I was getting this really nice counter pressure before I got in the pool, and now I'm not getting it. Brooke was doing some pressure points on my hands during the contractions. We tried the sling for a little bit. Looking back, that time in the pool was fairly peaceful time. And I think I was very much just trusting the process at that point. I have no clue how long I was in the pool for, but at one point I felt him rotate. So in hindsight, my pelvis was actually tilted in, which we didn't know till afterwards. And so I think that's why it's posterior. He couldn't do the right rotation. So the long labor was my body just trying to turn him. It was a very noticeable movement. I felt him move, and then I instantly started pushing. And so that was then kind of the pushing stage, which, yeah, I enjoyed it. I was like, well, I'm doing something. I was making noises that I never thought I could make in my life, but I was doing it. I was pushing. I was like, this is it. We're getting there. And this was the first time in the labor I wasn't overthinking things. I really am not fully aware of what was happening. Do you remember at one point my midwife said to me that I'm surrounded, and this might have actually been before I started pushing, but she said, you're surrounded by women that are welcoming you into motherhood. And I just remember that was a really beautiful moment because I'd picked all these women to be around me and I felt held. I just knew they were all around the pool, and I knew that it was just it was a lovely space to be in. I think the pushing stage was only about 20 minutes, so it was fast. I remember he descended fast. So I think once he moved, he dropped down pretty quickly. And then I remember at one point I checked myself to see, and I had not put my fingers inside of myself at all this labor because I knew that then there was a risk of infection from doing that with the waters breaking. And so at no point did I have any idea of where I was at. Not that I think I would know. But I did put my fingers in when I had started pushing and I didn't feel anything. And 2 contractions later, I did again and I could feel him. So it was quick in how fast he was coming down. Because of that, my midwife did a Doppler check, and I remember looking at the Doppler and it read 180. And I think I was then kind of like, I'm not concerned, but she was. And she actually then said to me later on that her Doppler, when the heart rate is low, it doubles it. So she read that as a very low heart rate. And because I'd only been pushing for 20 minutes, she wanted to know where he was at. So she pulled me out of the pool and she said, I just need to check where he is. I actually can't remember if I said he's right there. I think I did, but she kind of was like, I just need to check. So we got out of the pool. The only time I had seen someone get pulled out of the pool at this point of the pushing stage, it was a shoulder dystocia. And going back, that was one thing that was always on my mind. Like my mum had shoulder dystocia with my brother. And so I then was like, he's stuck. She's pulling me out because he's stuck. That's what's wrong. I did not associate the heart rate with why I was getting pulled out. So I was put on the floor and she did a check and she's like, oh, he's right there. And she was like, we just got to push him out. And so it's all a bit of a blur because externally, I don't think anyone could tell, but I was panicking and I was kind of like, I'd just gone from this really peaceful, calm, everything is just happening, to then just like being pulled out of the pool, put on the floor, And then she's like, you got to push, like, let's get him out. Let's push him out. And that then to me was like, something's wrong. If I'm being told I have to push him out, that is what I'd witnessed in the past, was like, there's something wrong. So we've got to get this baby out. I really do think that the low heart rate was purely because he was just coming through my pelvis. And so I pushed and he was, I think his head was born in a couple of pushes. I remember his head was born and I was holding his head, and then the next contraction came and I said, I can't push him. And I don't think there was actually a legitimate reason of me saying I can't push him, but I think it was just in my mind, I was like, he'll just come out, and he didn't. And so then my legs were grabbed and pulled back and I was kind of told push. And then I did. And then he came out very quickly because my hand was still on his head and I was kind of grabbing for him. And he was a bit tangled up in his cord. And so he'd kind of been brought up onto my chest and then pulled away. She was just trying to untangle him because he couldn't reach me. But again, in my panic of something is wrong, I'm literally grabbing for him. And I remember even for a couple of days later, I had vernix and blood under my nails from where I just desperately was grabbing for him. But like everyone's saying, like, he's okay, but I was not listening. Like there was I did not listen to anything anyone was saying to me at those last couple of minutes. It was just all kind of primal, like it was, and just a panic. And so then he was put on my chest and there's a video and I just it's just the biggest sigh. I think I was in shock. There was definitely an element of shock of just like, what just happened? That was just not where I thought things were going. I think there was 4 or 5 minutes between getting pulled out of the pool to him being born. So it was, a lot happened in a very, very short period of time. And then, we rubbed him a little bit and he had a big cry. I kind of blew in his face a little bit just to kind of get him to take a breath, because I think he was also in a bit of shock of just that was faster than I think he was also expecting it to be. And it was a very weird, like I don't have major memories of it. A lot of it is just videos that I've looked back on. And I think it was a happy moment, but it was also tainted by what the hell just happened. And then I kind of came back to it not long after of just I'm on the ground. I don't want to be here. My midwife gave me the Syntocin shot. She kind of said to me, I really recommend that you have this because of how long the labor was and everything. And I said yes. And then I was like, I want to get back in the pool. I just suddenly was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be laying on the ground. I want to be in the pool. I said, can I get back in the pool? And she was kind of like, I don't know if you'll be able to get up. And I literally just flip over, still holding him, because I think someone was like, oh, we'll help you with him. And I just flipped over, stood up, and I was just just get me in the pool. I don't want to be laying on the ground. I also very desperately wanted a photo of my placenta and him in the water. I was like, well, I can't get that if I'm on the ground, can I? So back in the pool I get. And I sat in there for a little bit and it was lovely. I think I was back in the water, I felt safe again. And then we were like, he's okay. He was looking good. And there's some lovely photos of just moments of being in the water with him and mum looking at him and stuff. And then my midwife was kind of like, oh, you might have to get out of the pool to birth the placenta. And I was like, well, fuck, I'm not getting out of this pool. Because I'd had the Syntocin shot, I was like, well, it's going to have done its job, so it's fine. She was going to get some gloves to just see what was happening. And then she turned back around and I was just holding the placenta. I just pulled it out. I was like, no. You're not getting me out of this pool again. And it's weird because it's such a blur. I don't really even remember what that was like. And so then she was like, okay, we'll get a bowl. And so I got my placenta photo with him in the water. I think I was in the pool for about 20 minutes and it was a really lovely 20 minutes. So I feel like I capped this really lovely moment of there was probably about an hour in the water before I gave birth and 20 minutes afterwards. And that was the nice period of the birth. She started getting a bit worried about his color, started getting a bit worried that he was getting cold. So she got me out, and I was okay at that point. I'd had my placenta, I had my photo. I was also holding him, and I was like, I think he's fine. But she was like, oh, I'm just a bit worried about his breathing. So we got out, and that's when kind of like all the checks kind of were happening. She was checking all his stats and stuff, and his saturation was a little low. But then she also was saying that her machine for that was a bit unreliable. So we just were kind of like, we'll just see how it goes. He was doing okay. I fed him, and he, latched on really well, and that was all really lovely. Then she checked me, and I had second degree tear, potentially third. And it's really interesting because I had been speaking to Amy a week or so before, and she had mentioned a gutter tear, like quite a deep tear kind of thing, and how that was quite painful to be stitched up at home. And that's what I had. So I was like, oh gosh. And so that's when my midwife suggested that we go into hospital for me to be stitched up. Then also the question of his breathing came up again, and that she wasn't overly happy with that. So the decision for an ambulance to be called was made. So I think we're at least 2 hours post-birth, if not a little bit longer at this point. The paramedics were amazing. It was a long weekend as well, and it was right on when their shift change happened. So I think they loved it. It was just before midnight, I believe. So maybe it was just that it was coming into the public holiday day, and they were in no rush for anything. I remember we were all talking to them about home birth, and they were checking him, and they were actually really happy with his breathing and really happy with his saturation. So they were like, it's up to you if you want us to take you in. And my midwife kind of said to me, oh, I'm just concerned that if it went downhill again and you're just at home on your own, that it'll be really stressful. So maybe it's worth just getting him checked just in case. So the decision was made to go in. So we headed in. I was separated. So I went into birth unit to be stitched up, and Rory went with my mum into special care, and Amy and my midwife came with me. So then the obstetrician came in, and she wasn't overly thrilled with me. She also, when she was stitching, it was excruciating. Like, that was worse than giving birth. I was on the gas. I then got really lightheaded. I think at one point Amy was like, I'm just going to take this off you because I think you need to just like breathe some room air for a bit. The obstetrician was like, oh, I'm just doing the last stitch here. And I then was like, okay, so she's done. That's fine. We're done. And then she said, okay, I've just got to do the last bit now. And I said, you said you were done. And she was like, no, I've done the muscle. I now need to stitch up the skin. And I was like, leave it. I don't care. And I don't know logically if that is the right thing to do, but in my mind, I was like, I don't want you doing this anymore. I want to be done. And she's like, oh, no, it'll be really uncomfortable for sex, which as a single person, I was like, I don't care. It's not something that bothers me. And then she's like, it'll look really bad. And I said, again, I do not care. Like, I don't want you to do this. I turned to my midwife and I said, do we need to? And she was kind of like, yeah, I think you should do it. And yeah, I was really like, oh, okay. So then we did that, and I nearly kicked the obstetrician in the head because it was just so painful. I remember holding on so tightly to the bed rail. It was horrible. And then she was done, and then she left, and we were just kind of like, oh, okay, like we're just here. I do remember there was a bit of debriefing that happened then with my midwife and Amy. And I think the decision of me being pulled out of the pool got brought up then. I believe I said to her, I knew he was right there. Did you have to pull me out? And she said, I couldn't take your word for it. And I remember that moment just being like, oh, okay. So I do remember being a little disappointed with that response. So then Mum came back in with Rory, and there had been a bit of a fight then as well. They wanted to admit him, and they wanted to put him on antibiotics. And Mum was like, no decision could be made until you talk to Beth. She's the mother. They also had been trying to get some blood from him and wasn't able to. And I remember Amy just being like, well, his feet are freezing. And so she put some hot water in a glove to try and like warm his foot up. And Yeah, I don't know if we ended up even getting that blood in the end. So he came back to me then. They were kind of like, we recommend you both stay and you go on antibiotics. And I said, no. So then they were kind of like, well, get out of here then. Amy recommended that I jump in the shower because we didn't have hot water at home. So I jumped in the shower. I remember getting really dizzy and lightheaded. And then I was kind of just like sat down on a chair. At no point were my obs taken when I was in hospital, which is one thing that I really do question. I think they were just annoyed. They were annoyed that I came in. They were annoyed that I took up resources and then just wanted to leave. They weren't happy with that. But yeah, we then packed up. We went home. So, and I think I'd been there for 3 or 4 hours. And I remember being really, really tired. I remember sitting in the car and I just was struggling to keep my eyes open. And I was also like, okay, we like from waters breaking to him being born was 66 hours. So I was like, it's been a long slog. I just was like, it's understandable that I'm feeling tired. We got home. I tried to sit down to feed him and I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was just so exhausted and I couldn't get him to latch. And I just said to mum, I said, I just need to sleep and then I'll feed him when we wake up. And so I remember I put him in his bassinet beside my bed and he just was just asleep and he was just curled up and I just didn't have any more energy to do anything. And I just laid down and fell asleep like instantly. It was probably like 20 minutes later. I woke up and I needed to do a wee and I shuffled out to the toilet. And I remember I sat down on the toilet and there was just this massive plop. And my blood loss at the birth was very minimal. There was blood in the pool, but I think they put it down at like 400 mils or something. It wasn't a lot. I didn't look into the toilet, but it was a very massive clot that came out of me. And there was a lot of blood in my pad. Mum had come in to check on me and she looked in the toilet and she was like, that's a lot of blood. And I was like, no, it's fine. Because I think in my head, I said, like, you know, they say 1 pad an hour. So I was like, it's fine. That's just what it is. That's the amount of blood it should be. So I put a new pair of disposable undies on, went back to bed. Again, I was just like, I'm just tired. I just need to go back to sleep. And I laid back down, closed my eyes, and then there was just this gosh, to the point where it was like I had the disposable undies on and it was just, I felt it just come out of that. And that's when I was like, okay, this is not just a little bit like postpartum bleeding. Mum had taken Rory out to the lounge room with her and I tried to call her. So I got the phone and I tried to call her and she didn't answer. I think I called her twice. And then I was laying there feeling blood just gushing out of me. And I was so oddly calm. And I just remember I was looking out the window and the sun was coming up and the sun was coming through the window. And I just was like, okay, I'm dying. And that was a really chilling moment of like, I felt like I just had to decide between letting myself die or like doing something about it. I then called out to mum and I called out a couple of times. And I think dad actually was the one that came in and they came in and I said, I'm bleeding. Like, this isn't right. We called my midwife and my midwife was like, call an ambulance. And then we called an ambulance and it's all a bit of a blur because it was like, I was kind of blacking out a little bit, but I was doing my own fundal massage and my midwife was on the phone to me and she was kind of telling me what to do. I could feel my uterus just relaxing and then just feeling the gush of the blood. And it was just so much. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics were hopeless. They didn't know what to do. One was very new. They couldn't get a cannula in me because I'd lost so much blood. And I was probably very dehydrated as well. And then they were like, oh, we're not going to give her the Syntocin. And my midwife was like, no, you need to. She needs that. And they were like, oh, who's that on the phone? And I was like, oh, my midwife. And then they were like, oh, okay. And then they gave me the Syntocin. It was just such a strange situation. And I was showing one of them how to do a fundal massage because they didn't even know how to do that. And so in my mind, I was like, just get me to the hospital. You are not equipped to help me. So take me to the place where I need to be, where they will help me. So yeah, so for the second time in 5 hours, I was put into the back of an ambulance, which I'd never been in an ambulance before. So that was interesting. Again, that whole drive then to the hospital, I was just tracking where we were at because I knew how vital it was that I got there. It was one of those like surreal moments, a little bit like, you know, in the TV shows where people are brought into the trauma bays and suddenly there's like 20 people around working on you. And yeah, I had a really lovely nurse. She just kind of stayed by my side. She really let me know what was going on. They pulled out a massive clot that was described as the size of a placenta, which everyone in the hospital while I was there loved to bring up. My blood pressure was just next to nothing. It was like 50/30 at one point when I looked at the monitor. That was after they'd stabilized me. I had 2 or 3 blood transfusions, and I think they gave me 6 bags of fluid. So it was a lot. I puffed up like a balloon. The only thing I can really describe to what it felt like was Violet from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory when she like puffs up. I remember at one point I couldn't see properly, I couldn't talk properly. It felt like my face was stretched too much. And I said to the nurse, I said, I feel everything feels tight and sore. And she's like, yeah, you've been pumped full of so many fluids that your whole body's just like exploded pretty much. That's what it felt like. They couldn't get my blood pressure up for a while because they couldn't get a really good reading. They tried a couple of times to put something in my vein to read the blood pressure, and that was excruciating. And it was so painful that my blood pressure started to rise from them doing that. While this is all happening, it is a public holiday. The hospital was packed because doctors weren't open. So every man and his dog was in the hospital coughing. My dad was sitting out in the hallway holding an 8-hour-old baby, and they didn't like that. So I had the doctors in constantly asking to admit him. In the end, I agreed for observations because they were kind of like, we just want to keep an eye on him. We're just a bit worried about him sitting out here with all these people, and they agreed to that. And then I got moved up to ICU. So I was put in ICU and they let him come and see me. And I got to see him, I got to hold him, I latched him. So he did have a little bit of milk. And then not long after, I think I only had him for like 10 minutes. And then they came back and said, oh, he's got to go back. There's something else that he needs a check for. And mum was like, oh, well, I'll go with him. Because at this stage, actually, they had said that I had an infection. And so he will have been exposed to the infection. So then they said, we got to take him back to put his cannula in. Mum was like, I'll come. And they said, oh, no one's allowed to be in there when we do the cannula. It's just too upsetting for family members to see. So just let us do it. And so they took him. And then about half an hour later, someone came in and she said, we need your permission. We need to put him on a feeding tube. There was a couple of other things that they said they needed. They were like, he's gone downhill really fast. He's not well. And I kind of was like, well, what has happened? I don't understand. I had him half an hour ago. He was okay. And they're like, he's just gone downhill really quickly. He's not well. He really needs all these things. Again, they wouldn't let us see him. So I said no to the formula. We had some donor milk that a friend of mine was like literally pumping in the hospital car park. Amy had been able to organize that while I was in the emergency room. And so obviously I agreed to them doing what they had to do. And then, yeah, mum went in and saw him like an hour later, and then she's like, he's okay. So it was all just a bit of a blur. It was a really strange day. So at that point, he was purely being fed through the feeding tube, and mum was trying to be there as much as possible to give him a bottle at the same time so that he was sucking, which I think is what they were recommending. I was in ICU I think I was technically an ICU patient for 2 days. They couldn't get me over to the maternity ward though. There was like too many people had birthed over the weekend. They finally agreed to letting Rory come to me for feeds. And so every couple of hours, a midwife would bring him in. I would feed him. I would then call the special care unit. Someone would come and take him back. So that was kind of like the journey I ended up being put on antibiotics. My bleeding, like, it calmed down after everything, and my blood pressure did come back up. There was a couple of things they weren't overly thrilled about, and they kind of kept me there until those levels stabilized. But I was very desperate to get home. I was just a bit done with the hospital. It's just not where I wanted to be. It was the Thursday I went home. I'd done a night on the maternity ward, and that was a really rough night. So he was born on the Sunday night, and it was Thursday that I went home. When I finally got out of ICU, I sat through a peds round in the special care unit, and the pediatrician said that, oh, this baby's on antibiotics because of risks taken during labor. So suddenly it wasn't because he was dying and going downhill and all this stuff. It was actually because they didn't agree that I'd labored for as long as I did at home. And actually, my stuff came back. I did not have an infection, and neither did he. So it was all actually quite unnecessary. And just the hospital, I felt like it was them trying to prove that I'd done something wrong. They were saying that the reason I bled was because of how long my labor was. And I had every obstetrician in the hospital come and stand over my bed in ICU at different points and telling me that I shouldn't have birthed at home and that I should have come in and got induced. So, yeah, it was a really unpleasant experience. There was a couple of really nice midwives, but overall, I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. It was a really, really hard start to motherhood, I guess.
I wanted to say thank you for sharing all that, Beth, because it is just such a huge journey and just a really different experience to what you envisioned, I'm sure. And just when you talk about that moment that you're lying in bed, it's just extremely harrowing to listen to and I'm sure to experience. It must have been just so terrifying. And I just want to acknowledge how big your story is.
Mm.
You really didn't deserve that. So I just want to say, yeah, thank you for sharing, and we love you so much.
I think there's points where you're like, yeah, that was fucked, but like now it should be okay. And then it's like something else happens.
Yeah, did you want to speak about your postpartum from that point and obviously breastfeeding?
Yeah, so I think I was pretty determined from the start to breastfeed. I was pumping in the hospital, using the hospital pumps, which were shocking. And then Amy brought me a pump to try. I actually had, for the amount of blood that I lost, I had a decent amount of milk once my milk came in. I remember sitting in this like little room in the hospital with Amy, and I think I pumped a ridiculous amount as quickly as I did. And so I just wasn't willing to like give up something else. I think the day I got discharged from ICU, I went to go in to special care with Amy to get her to watch her feed, because I'd been feeding him laying down in an ICU bed with both of us had cannulas everywhere, and it was really difficult. And so I kind of wanted my doula and my lactation consultant to be able to help me, and they refused to let her into special care. They were like, only 2 people are allowed to be in there. The midwife was like, it's only the mum and the dad that are allowed to come in. And I said, well, there's no dad. So like I just really wanted my support people to support me. So then we had to like take Rory out of special care. So I was allowed to take him out. I just wasn't allowed to have people come in. But yeah, I went home and we were doing okay feeding wise. And I think I got home and I was finally like, the worst of it is done. I think in my head, I was like, well, that was ridiculous and that was horrible, but we're on the other side. It's going to be up from here. I think I announced his birth the day after we got home. And then there was like visitors, which like, you know, looking back, I saw too many people too quickly. But I was also kind of excited to be like, look, I've done it. I definitely also like dumped my whole birth story on a lot of people really quickly. But I was also very much like, well, yeah, that happened, but I'm fine. Let's not overthink this. But there was definitely some grief. There was grief there from the start. And then when he was 10 days old, Rory spiked a temp. I remember like that night and I was like, he's warm. He feels really warm. This isn't right. I was kind of taking his temperature with like an underarm thermometer and it was reading maybe like high 36. But then I had like a thermal one and that was reading 38. And I was kind of like, oh, like, I don't know what's going on. And I remember I called the hotline and they said to go in and get him checked out. And so mum and I drove into the children's hospital. They took his temperature, it was 38.8. It kind of continued to rise. And very quickly, a lot happened. Again, I was just there in just like a level of shock of like all these things that were being said that needed to be done. They wanted us to do a lumbar puncture. And I was really scared about that because the pediatrician who told us about it, and I said, can you go through the risks for me? And I just don't think he really realized what he was saying with how he was saying it. He's like, well, worst case scenario, when they take the fluid, the brain drops and they die. And that was kind of like what I was told. And I was just like, well, no, like, I don't want you to do that. Like, at no point was a percentage given or, oh, that's a worst case scenario. And I think he said, I only know of one case. And I was kind of like, well, one case is too many. In the end, we did agree to it. I think I consulted a couple of people. I think my midwife told me that everything was pointing to yes, that he should have that. And yeah, it was a really tricky stay because I remember as well, that mum and dad had gone to go and get stuff out of the car and they came to get him to go check to do the lumbar puncture. And they just came and they said, okay, we got to go. And it was, again, a procedure that they didn't want family members in for. And so, yeah, they just came and they took him. And I remember just sitting there crying because I was like, I didn't say goodbye. And I was really scared that he was going to die. And it was just it was just not handled well. I just think there was not a whole lot of support or compassion. And yeah, it was really tricky. But he obviously did come back and he was okay. Even when they were trying to put his cannula in, because like I have really bad veins for cannulas and I think he's just inherited that from me. And I remember they wanted to do the sugar water and I was just hesitant about that. And I remember like so freshly postpartum as well. And I'm literally on my tippy toes leaning over this hospital bed where this tiny little baby is just screaming. And I'm just trying to shove my boob in his mouth to try and feed him while they're trying to put this cannula in. And it was just a really tough stay. In the end, he had a viral meningitis, which is not the worst type of meningitis, but it's still not good. And he had a couple of viruses. So we put it down to actually the ICU and me being in ICU. I did have a cold coming out of hospital. And so I don't know if he caught it from me or he caught it from someone in ICU because the hospital I was at, they used their ICU as just like extra beds. I think there was only me and one other person that were actually legitimate ICU patients in there. So there is a high chance someone was just infectious and caught that from them. So he had his second dose of antibiotics within 10 days. The poor thing ended up with some really bad gut issues after that. He couldn't tolerate dairy for over a year and a half. It was just a really rough start. I feel like I tried to convince myself it was fine. The fresh postpartum period especially was really the first 6 weeks was hard. I remember I had like the bedtime fear. I would start getting anxious around like 3 p.m. knowing that we were getting close to bedtime. And then I just the continuous waking up when I was so tired. I did kind of come out of that as he started to kind of settle into a bit of a routine. I think I convinced myself I was fine when mentally I was not. I was really struggling with the birth. I was really struggling with what happened. I was really struggling to connect with him. I really struggled to like bond for a long time. And I just put it down to just everything that happened afterwards. Like I just didn't get long enough of just peace after the birth to just connect with him. And then There were moments where I didn't want to hold him. If I wasn't feeding him, which I was like, I have to feed, I wasn't feeding him. I was fine with other people having him. Or even I would just put him in the bassinet with a dummy. And my midwife at one point was like, oh, I don't think he needs a dummy. I remember actually saying to her, oh, yeah, but I know he's breathing if he's got the dummy. Like, I can hear it. There was just this underlying anxiety. I was anxious that he just would die. And I just constantly was expecting to wake up and him be dead. And I think there was an element of that was also like, you don't expect yourself to nearly bleed out after a birth. So I was like, there was all these things that you don't expect that to happen. So then I was like, well, the bad stuff can't be done. Something else has to be around the corner. I don't think it was until he was a couple of months old that I really settled and then started to process things. I did a lot of like debriefing with that same counselor that I saw at the start of my pregnancy, and I have still been seeing her on and off, and he's nearly 2. I'm still debriefing and figuring out this birth to this day. There's still a lot of grief and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of, I think one thing that always I come back to was that what feels like for the first time in my life, I was at a moment where I trusted my body and I trusted that everything was going well. And that was very swiftly taken away from me. And then it just turned to shit after that. And so I think that was a really difficult thing to just like get over, and something that, yeah, I don't know if I'll ever come to terms with it, but yeah.
Where are you at with it all now? If you're listening to this in the future or someone's listening to it, what has helped you sort of process that experience, and what do you think would make the difference for other people who might have been through something similar?
Yeah, I think talking it out to safe people has been like so important. And I can only imagine how many more people I would have dumped it on if I didn't have some safe people to really just keep going over and over and over and then being okay with that. I've also very much like, I have actually spoken to my midwife and was able to express the disappointment. It hasn't made it easier, but it did help in that I was able to kind of just share how much of an effect it had and how much it rocked me, not just for the birth and the postpartum, but like it took me a while to find my groove, even becoming a mother, because I feel like I just was questioning everything. I was constantly questioning if I was a good mother. I was constantly questioning if I was doing the right thing. I do think it's just the moment that I felt like I was reclaiming and finding myself to be able to become the mother I wanted to be. It's like that was taken away. So I really did need to find that person back again, which has been really hard. It's been a really, really hard journey. I think I'm very lucky to have, well, you girls, just to have a village. I was supported so beautifully. I was so blessed with so many people dropping off food for weeks and weeks. And I'd worked hard to create that village. It wasn't a village that just appeared. I'd been running that home birth group for nearly 4 years before I had Rory, and had built up this community around me so that then when I actually needed to be held, they held me. And it was a village that they had held other people within that. So it was one of those things where it's like I was very lucky, well, very thankful to have those people. But yeah, I think it's just been a lot of debriefing, a lot of just processing. If I was to go back, and what would I say to myself then? I don't even know. I feel like there's still so much more I have to do to get to that point. But I think it's one of those things that it's like, I have had to get to a point where I was like, you didn't do anything wrong. There was definitely a part of me that was like, maybe I should have gone into the hospital earlier. Maybe I should have been induced. Maybe I should have done this differently. You go through every scenario of what if I'd done that? Would it have been a different situation? I think I've just had to come to terms with like, I made the right decisions for me at the right time. And that, yeah, like I wouldn't have changed in terms of my decisions. I wouldn't have changed any of my decisions at any point. There are things I would have changed. I would have I think if I saw a chiropractor in pregnancy, we would have identified the, tilted pelvis. And then I probably wouldn't have had a posterior baby. I wouldn't have had the stop-start labor. I wouldn't have, there's a lot of knock-on effects there. If I had my time again, I would hope that I could be more confident in what I was feeling, which was that I was safe, my baby was safe. We didn't need to get pulled out of that pool. So I do generally think that if I had been left alone, that I probably would have birthed him 10, 15 minutes later. And then I just don't see how everything that happened afterwards would have happened. So I do think that I wish I had my voice then and was able to say no, or just asked for more clarification in why I was being pulled out, to not kind of go into that spiral state that I did.
If you are speaking to first-time mums who are planning to have babies, what messages would you like to impart on them? What suggestions, what wisdom would you like to share?
Be so picky with your birth team. Also, I think it's one of those things that you really need to work on what you want before you fall pregnant. Once you're pregnant, it is so hard to really think clearly. And so it's one of those things where as much as I thought, and this is hard because what I thought I would want in labor, I didn't actually want. So I thought I wanted someone who would mother me, comfort me, where actually in reality, I wanted to be left alone. I wanted the people who were actively doing things. So people who were giving the counter pressure. Yeah, I wanted you there. Other than that, I didn't want any interference because I was it was interrupting me just in the zone. I think that's one thing looking back that was so important was I knew that he was okay and I knew that I was okay and I knew that he was about to be born. And I didn't have the confidence to use my voice in that moment. And I think that's really important, is just practicing and making sure also everyone around you knows that if things start kind of shifting away from where you were expecting it to go, just being let's actually have more of a decision in this. I think maybe having conversations with care providers of saying, I want to be included in the conversations. I don't want you just to tell me what I'm doing or what you're doing. I want there to be a discussion. If there's an emergency situation, that is why you were there. But let me be included in the decision. We're constantly told that when authority figures are telling you something, you do it. But it's at what point we've got to start listening to our bodies and our babies and learn how to tap into that. I think that something that needs to be done before you fall pregnant because it's hard.
Yeah, it's certainly not something you can just learn during pregnancy. You get lots of opportunities to practice, but it's not really enough at the end of the day. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Beth, for sharing that.
You're giving me a space to share it.
Well, our pleasure. Thanks for trusting us with it.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to have been able to hear it.
I'm very impressed with you guys being able to do that for me. So thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
It's a privilege. Yeah.
Love you all. Thank
Love
you.
you too.